Let me take you back, not to the ruins of Rome, but to the sound of it. Picture this. You're standing on a dusty plain. Suddenly, the horizon begins to tremble, not from the earth, but from synchronized pounding footsteps. A wall of men appears. Shields high, spears forward, eyes cold. This wasn't just an army, it was a machine. It was fear wearing sandals. The Roman army was not built on strength alone. It thrived on something far more devastating: discipline, deception, and psychological dominance. While other ancient armies rushed into battle screaming wildly, hoping to overwhelm their enemies with sheer chaos, the Romans did the opposite. Every step, every sound, every breath was calculated to terrify and control. You've probably seen the Roman soldier in movies: clean armor, dramatic speeches, maybe a little blood, but lots of glory. Forget that. The truth is far less romantic. In real battles, there was no music, no elegant duels, just exhaustion, mud, fear, and the relentless machinery of Roman strategy grinding down everything in its path. But here's the twist. Many of the Roman victories weren't just won on the battlefield. They were won before the fighting even started. One of the most unsettling tactics? Sound. The Romans knew the human mind is fragile, so they made noise, a lot of it. Before charging, legions would bang their shields with short swords in perfect unison, creating a deafening mechanical roar that echoed across valleys. This wasn't random intimidation, it was psychological warfare. The noise simulated something inhuman, something invincible. Add to that the synchronized march of 5,000 soldiers whose footsteps struck the ground at the same time. Imagine hearing that thunder before you could even see them. Ancient sources describe entire armies breaking ranks and fleeing just from the approach of a Roman column. The fear wasn't just about dying, it was about facing a force that felt less like men and more like fate. And they didn't stop there. Once close enough, Roman soldiers would unleash organized shouts, not chaotic yells like other armies, but timed, guttural roars in deep tones. Some historians believe these sounds were trained to vibrate through enemy armor and bones. This wasn't by accident. Roman military commanders understood that war wasn't only fought with steel, it was fought with nerves. If you could crack a man's spirit, his sword would drop soon after. What made it worse? The soldiers were covered in symbols: red cloaks for intimidation, eagle standards to remind everyone who they fought for, and sometimes even war paint. They knew that the battlefield was not just a place of violence, but a stage of fear. Let's take a moment to appreciate the sheer theater of it all. Imagine watching a Roman legion approach. A wave of red cloaks, walls of bronze glinting in the sun, flags snapping, drums pounding, voices booming. And still, they didn't attack. Not yet. The wait was part of the plan. The silence between the noise made the fear grow thicker. By the time the Romans moved, many enemies were already half defeated in their minds, and this was just the opening act. If a Roman general saw the enemy was on edge, he wouldn't charge immediately. No, he'd let the fear simmer, maybe send forward a few lines in perfect formation, then stop. Maybe show off a drill midfield to display discipline. Maybe even turn around for a moment, make the enemy think they had a chance. And just when hope flickered, boom, full assault. This manipulation of perception wasn't a side tactic. It was the core of Roman strategy. Unlike other armies that relied on brute strength or raw numbers, the Romans invested heavily in control. They studied how people felt in battle. They knew fear could be more lethal than a sword, and they used that knowledge like a weapon. One Roman tactic involved hiding cavalry behind trees or hills, letting enemies believe they were only facing infantry. Another involved faking retreats to lure foes into traps. Every decision, from uniform color to marching rhythm, was made to keep the enemy guessing, second-guessing, and ultimately, panicking. This wasn't just smart, it was terrifying. We often admire the Roman Empire for its engineering and roads, but what truly built, it wasn't bricks. It was fear, weaponized and repeated over and over until entire nations knelt before a legionary's shadow. And this is only the beginning. In the next part, we'll look at one of the most iconic Roman tactics of all time, the testudo, or tortoise. Formation. It was more than a human shield wall. It was a fortress on legs, and it gave the Romans a level of battlefield control that still shocks military historians today. But first ask yourself, if you were facing the thunder of 5,000 boots and a wall of steel, would you run or would you fight? There was a moment in ancient warfare when enemies of Rome learned a terrifying truth. Swords couldn't cut what they couldn't reach. Enter the testudo, Latin for tortoise. It might sound cute. It wasn't. Imagine you're a barbarian, warrior, strong, wild, hungry for Roman blood. You charge across the field, heart pounding, sword raised high, only to slam face first into what looks like a metal box with legs. No openings, no faces, just wall after wall of interlocking shields, moving toward you like a living creature. That's the testudo, and once it was in motion, very little could stop it. Let's break it down. The Romans didn't invent the shield wall, but they perfected it. The testudo was their masterpiece. A tightly packed group of soldiers, usually around 36 to 60 men, would arrange themselves into a square. The front row locked their shields forward, the sides held theirs out, and the ones in the middle raised, theirs overhead. The result? Complete protection. Arrows, bounced off, javelins. Useless. Even rocks hurled from city walls rattled off like pebbles on a rooftop. This formation wasn't just defensive. It was psychological. Picture yourself on a castle wall looking down at this silent, creeping monster. Your archers rain death. Nothing happens. The box keeps moving, slowly, steadily, without fear. It doesn't yell. It doesn't flinch. It's like watching inevitability itself crawl toward your gates. That kind of thing breaks a man before a sword ever touches him. But don't mistake it for a passive move. The testudo was a war machine. Once it reached the enemy lines or fortress walls, the front shields opened just enough for short stabbing swords, gladi, to strike with precision. Protected from above and the sides, Roman soldiers could kill while barely exposing themselves. In tight sieges, these formations could push right up to the base of a wall, allowing sappers to dig or battering rams to move forward without being torn apart by enemy missiles. And like everything the Romans did, it was practiced endlessly. Testudo. Drills were part of every legion's training. Soldiers had to trust the man beside them, and more importantly, the man behind them. One gap, one lazy shield position, and the whole thing crumbled. It wasn't about individual heroism. It was about collective survival. There are even records of testudo formations moving through flaming oil, through hailstorms of arrows, and still pressing on. In the siege of Jerusalem, Roman legions advanced under a continuous downpour of flaming projectiles, and they still managed to close in without breaking formation. That's not just discipline. That's fanatic-level focus. What made the testudo so brilliant wasn't just the idea, it was the timing. A general didn't call for the formation randomly. It came into play exactly when needed, advancing on fortified positions, protecting engineers, covering retreats. It was flexible, fluid, sometimes used in small squads, sometimes across entire fronts. In one battle, Romans reportedly used overlapping testudos in waves, so if the front formation fell, the next would replace it instantly. It was like watching a human conveyor belt of death, but of course no formation is perfect. The testudo moved slowly, very slowly. It worked brilliantly against arrows and thrown weapons but struggled in open combat against mobile cavalry. And, if you could isolate one testudo, surround it and attack from below or through fire, it could crack. Some enemies learned to light oil-soaked cloths and roll them beneath the shields. Others would try to disrupt the rhythm with loud noises or false charges. Still, even those who beat the testudo respected it, because it represented everything Rome stood for: order, unity, and patience. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't heroic, but it worked. It crushed chaos with coordination. Think about that for a moment. Most armies in history, even today, rely on some version of speed, surprise, or overwhelming power. But the Romans? They built a tactic around being slow, around not reacting, around becoming a walking wall and daring you to break it. And most of the time, you couldn't. Even in modern warfare, echoes of the Testudo remain. Riot police formations, shield tactics used in protests, direct descendants of Rome's philosophy. Stay together, move as one, and make fear your armor. And let's not forget what it felt like inside the formation. Imagine being one of those soldiers. It's dark, hot. You hear the thump of arrows overhead, the rattle of spears on shields. The world is a cage of metal and sweat. You don't see the enemy, just shadows. Your orders are short, precise. You don't fight for glory. You fight to keep the shield above your head steady. You fight to move one step forward, then another, then another. That's not battle. That's ritual. And the Romans turned it into art. Even enemies who hated Rome admitted this tactic was unmatched in discipline. A Gallic chieftain once called it fighting ghosts in a shell. And perhaps that's the best way to describe it. You weren't facing men, you were facing a spirit. One that didn't break, didn't bleed, didn't even blink. It simply advanced. In today's world of drones and cyber warfare, the Testudo might seem primitive, but make no mistake, it was revolutionary. It proved that human coordination, when pushed to its extreme, could conquer anything: fire, arrows, chaos, even fear. And this was only one tactic. The Romans had dozens more. In the next part, we'll uncover how they used misinformation, bait tactics, and psychological manipulation to win wars before swords were ever drawn. From feigned retreats to hidden legions, Rome didn't just fight with weapons. It fought with mind games, and often that was more effective than any blade. So what's more dangerous, a man with a sword, or a man who knows exactly when not to use it? Not all battles are fought with blades. Some are fought in whispers, in rumors, and in silence so sharp it could split a man's loyalty. The Romans weren't just experts in war, they were architects of fear. And one of their most dangerous weapons? Misinformation. They understood that truth could win a battle, but a lie, well placed, could win a war. Let's step into the mind of a Roman general. He doesn't want to meet your army head-on. No, he wants you tired, confused, distrustful of your own scouts. He wants you to walk straight into your own doom, thinking it was your idea. Take the classic Roman tactic of the feigned retreat. To the untrained eye, it looks like panic. A Roman unit breaks rank, runs from battle, drops weapons. Your army cheers. You charge after them, sensing blood, sensing glory. And then, snap, you're in a canyon. You're in mud. You're surrounded. Because the Romans weren't retreating. They were baiting. This tactic wasn't new, but Rome perfected it. They understood that pride is a leash, and all they had to do was pull. Many armies fell into this trap, rushing into narrow passes where Roman ambush squads, hidden behind trees or cliffs, would pounce like wolves. What began as victory turned into slaughter, and the only thing sharper than Roman swords was the humiliation, but it went deeper. Rome loved using false intelligence. They would leak information, intentionally through prisoners or double agents. The Roman supply line is weak. They've sent half their legions north. Their general is sick. All lies, all carefully crafted. The goal? To get the enemy to act irrationally, and it worked. One of the most famous examples was the Battle of Lake Trasimene. Hannibal may have executed it, but he learned it from watching Rome. The Romans would later use similar methods in Gaul and Britain, hiding legions in forests, luring tribal leaders into negotiation talks, then capturing or assassinating them once they arrived. To the Romans, war wasn't just steel on steel. It was chess, played on a human board. One move they favored? Fake surrender. During the siege of certain cities, Romans would pretend to negotiate peace. They'd promise safety, sometimes even offer food. And when the gates opened, Roman spies were already inside. Within hours, the city would fall. Not from siege towers, but from the inside out. And when force wasn't enough, they used fear as leverage. Roman generals would execute prisoners in front of enemy envoys, then send those envoys back with a message. This is mercy. Next time, we won't be so kind. Entire villages surrendered without a fight after seeing what happened to their neighbors. It wasn't just brutality, it was performance warfare. But perhaps the most sinister tactic of all was Rome's long game. They would embed agents in enemy cities years before a campaign, merchants, builders, even entertainers. These people weren't random, they were trained observers. When war came, they lit fires, opened gates, spread panic. The invasion didn't start at the city wall, it started in the marketplace. And here's what made it terrifying. It didn't feel like war. It felt like the world turning upside down. In Gaul, Rome once disguised a full legion as traitors. They entered a rebellious town, smiling, selling, laughing with children. Then, one night, they took the armory, locked the gates, and opened them for the rest of the army. The town didn't fall in battle, it was gift-wrapped. This level of strategy required patience. Months, sometimes years, but it worked. Because the Roman army wasn't just trying to win, they were trying to reshape the world. And reshaping takes time. But psychological warfare didn't stop at deception. It extended into ritual. Before battle, Roman soldiers went through coordinated chants, arm movements, and shield drills, not just for practice, but for intimidation. Their formations became a kind of theater, designed to send a clear message. We are not men. We are something more. Some tribes facing Rome believed the legions were possessed or blessed by gods because of how inhumanly disciplined they looked. And the Romans did little to correct that impression. In fact, they encouraged it. Superstition became a weapon. Romans even named their camps after gods of fear and conquest. The message was clear. This land doesn't belong to you anymore. The moment our banners go up, it belongs to Mars. And if all that failed, they went personal. Roman commanders would send individual letters to opposing generals, promising land, money, even marriages, if they betrayed their people. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it caused paranoia. Either way, it fractured unity. Because in war, doubt is a disease, and the Romans were expert infectors. Let's pause and ask, why does this matter? Because the tactics of Rome still echo in our world today. Misinformation, divide and conquer, Trojan horse strategies, they all come from these ancient blueprints. Modern war may be digital, but the fear, the manipulation, the theater, it's Roman at its core. Rome taught us that the loudest weapon isn't the sword, it's the whisper before it. And their generals knew when to stay silent, when to shout, and when to let their enemies destroy themselves. In the next part, we'll look at the ultimate weapon in the Roman arsenal, discipline. More than any blade or trick, it was this code that forged Rome's true strength. We'll dive into the training, the punishments, and the brutal loyalty that kept their army together through betrayal, famine, and hellish battles. Because in the Roman army, breaking rank wasn't just shameful. It could mean your own brothers would execute you where you stood. There's a reason the Roman army outlasted empires, kings, and even time itself. That reason wasn't just strategy, or steel, or even luck. It was discipline. Roman discipline wasn't about shouting orders or waving swords. It was a code, etched, not in scrolls but in blood, sweat, and the broken backs of men who disobeyed it. Let's be honest, most ancient armies were chaotic mobs. A few brave men leading a crowd of drunk, half-trained warriors who could barely hold formation. But the Roman legion, it was different. It was a machine built on fear, training, and ruthless accountability. From the moment a recruit joined the ranks, he was no longer a man. He became a part, a cog in something far larger than himself. His name didn't matter. His past didn't matter. Only one thing mattered: obedience, and that obedience wasn't optional. During training, soldiers would march over 20 miles a day, in full armor, under scorching sun, with only stale bread and vinegar to sustain them. They built camps, dug trenches, sharpened stakes, all before they even saw a battlefield. But it wasn't just physical, it was psychological. Every task, no matter how small, had a purpose. Break the ego, forge the unit. Miss a command? You were whipped. Fall asleep on guard duty? Buried alive? Flee from battle? You weren't killed by the enemy. You were killed by your own brothers. Yes, you read that right. One of the most brutal punishments in Roman history was called decimation. If a unit disgraced itself, cowardice, mutiny, failure, the punishment was simple and horrifying. The soldiers were divided into groups of 10, and each group had to draw lots. The loser in each group was beaten to death by the other 9. No sword, no honor, just rocks, fists, and terror. And the survivors? They weren't spared. They were shamed, starved, and forced to sleep outside the camp walls without shelter. Decimation didn't just punish failure. It created fear, a fear so deep, so personal, that men would rather die facing the enemy than face the judgment of their own comrades, but it worked. Legions that had been decimated never broke again. Their silence in formation was heavier than any war drum. They marched with haunted eyes. And they fought like ghosts, men who had already stared into the pit of disgrace and come out the other side. Still think discipline is just about rules? This was culture, a belief that the unit mattered more than the self, that your shield wasn't just for you, it was for the man beside you, that your failure wasn't personal, it was betrayal. And the Romans reinforced this belief every day. Officers didn't just command from the back, they shared food with their men, slept beside them, bled beside them. This created an army not of mercenaries, but of brothers. Brothers who fought not just for Rome, but for each other. Even the gear reflected this code. Roman armor wasn't flashy. It was uniform. Shields were painted the same. Helmets lined up the same. Spears held at the same angle. This uniformity wasn't just aesthetic, it erased individuality. It said, we are not many, we are one. And when that one moved, armored, silent, deadly, it didn't feel like an army. It felt like a storm. One story says a Roman general once ordered his own son executed for disobeying a command in battle, even though the son had won the fight. Why? Because discipline mattered more than outcome. Disobedience, no matter how successful, was a crack in the wall. And cracks in Rome were sealed with blood. Harsh, unquestionably, but effective, absolutely. It's what allowed a legion to hold the line while outnumbered 10-1. It's what made soldiers dig fortifications after a 30-mile march. It's what kept men charging forward even when their commanders fell, their banners burned, and their bones shattered. Roman soldiers didn't fight because they were fearless. They fought because there was no other option. Their mind was trained to follow the man ahead, no matter what. And when the man ahead died, the next man stepped forward. No confusion, no collapse, just motion. Because that's what Rome was. Relentless motion. This same discipline built roads that still stand today. It dug canals, raised cities, laid siege to empires. The same hand that held the sword also planted wheat, wrote laws, and stamped coins. Because a Roman wasn't just a killer, he was a builder, and the army was his blueprint. But don't be fooled into thinking discipline meant blind loyalty. There were rebellions, deserters, betrayals. But they were rare. And when they came, they were crushed so thoroughly that stories of their punishments became warnings passed down for generations. A single Roman soldier, properly trained, could hold off 5 men. Not because he was stronger, but because he didn't hesitate. He didn't improvise. He followed his training, trusted his shield, trusted his brother, and kept moving forward. Even in death, Roman discipline held. Bodies were recovered, buried with honors. Helmets were passed to younger recruits, and the line never broke. Because the line was never just made of flesh, it was made of belief, of repetition, of unshakable will. And here's the final twist. Discipline wasn't just about winning battles. It was about creating an image, one so powerful that enemies surrendered before the fight. They heard the march, they saw the formation, and they knew, we're not facing men, we're facing Rome. In the next part, we'll look at how the Roman army used that image, combined with calculated brutality, to completely erase resistance. From mass crucifixions to public displays of power, we'll see how terror wasn't just a side effect of war for the Romans. It was a tool, a message carved in flesh, stone, and memory. Because Rome didn't just defeat its enemies, it made sure they were never forgotten. Some empires rise with gold, others with trade. Rome rose with fear. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a side effect. It was the strategy. Rome understood a brutal truth. If your enemy fears you before you strike, the battle is half won. And so they made fear tangible, visible, unforgettable, and carved into the bones of those who dared resist. Let's begin with something most people associate with the Romans: crucifixion. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a message. Crucifixion was public, slow, humiliating, and designed to linger in memory. When Spartacus and his rebel army were defeated, the Romans didn't just kill the survivors. They crucified over 6,000 of them along the Appian Way, stretching for miles, each cross a warning to every passerby. This is what defiance looks like. Think about that. You're a farmer, a merchant. You ride into Rome, and for hours you pass the twisted bodies of rebels. By the time you arrive at the city gates, you're not just tired. You're changed. The idea of revolt, it dies in your throat. That was the Roman way. Fear wasn't a weapon of last resort. It was built into the architecture of their empire, literally. Their triumphal arches didn't just celebrate victory, they displayed the conquered. Prisoners were paraded in chains through the streets. Enemy kings walked weeping behind Roman generals. The streets weren't cobbled with stone, they were paved with submission. And when a province rebelled, Rome didn't just crush the uprising, they erased the memory of it. They would burn cities, salt the earth, ban the local language, destroy statues, rewrite histories. In some cases, they renamed entire regions as if to say, you no longer exist unless we say so. What better way to control a people than to make them forget who they were? But it wasn't all rage and fire. Sometimes Rome used fear with surgical precision. They'd spare one town, but only after slaughtering its neighbors. The spared town became Rome's eyes, ears, and servants, terrified to ever step out of line. This was known as exemplary punishment. Punish one brutally, so others don't have to be. And when fear started to fade, they'd remind you. Statues of emperors towered over every city. Legionaries marched through towns even in peace. Coins bore the face of Caesar. The message was clear. Rome is watching. Rome is near. Rome is forever. In Gaul, after a particularly brutal revolt, Caesar ordered the hands of captured rebels cut off and let them live. Why? So they could walk back home as human billboards of terror. Their missing limbs told a story no scroll ever could. Even religion wasn't off limits. Rome adopted local gods but placed them under Roman rule. You may worship, but only through us. Priests were monitored, temples taxed, sacred festivals were co-opted into military celebrations. Rome didn't destroy your beliefs, it conquered them too. Now this all sounds monstrous, and it was. But here's the irony. It worked. The Roman Empire didn't stretch from Britain to Egypt because people loved Rome. It stretched that far because people feared what happened if they didn't obey. Order was preserved not through kindness, but through the memory of horror. And yet, within that horror, there was stability. Once you submitted, Rome gave you roads, aqueducts, markets, law. The Pax Romana, Rome's famous peace, wasn't a gift. It was a deal. Behave, and we protect you. Disobey, and we destroy you. Simple, ruthless, effective. This is what made the Roman army different. It didn't just win battles, it shaped reality. Its victories echoed across generations, not just because of the blood spilled, but because of how that blood was used. They didn't just want you defeated, they wanted you to remember how you were defeated. And they wanted your grandchildren to remember too. So they built monuments to their own violence, etched it in stone, told their version of your defeat, in marble, not memory. That's the dark genius of Rome. It turned terror into infrastructure. Now, you might be asking, how did it feel to be a Roman soldier in this system? Surprisingly, many believed they were doing good. They thought they were bringing order to chaos, civilization to savages. The brutality was justified, necessary even. They were not just warriors, they were messengers of Roman destiny. And so they marched forward, one village at a time, one cross at a time, one silence after another. Rome understood something most armies still forget: weapons win battles. But reputation wins empires, and no reputation is more powerful than one built on controlled fear. Even today, the legacy remains. We remember the glory, we remember the roads, but buried beneath it all is a shadow, the fear that made Rome unstoppable. The question is, how far would you go to win? Would you build with blood? Would you rule with silence? Would you crucify rebellion into memory? Rome did,